Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we are joined today by Neil Barnfather, MBE. Neil is a serial entrepreneur and currently working for a technology company in a really exciting space, which is indoor mapping. So Neil, I'd love to have you tell us a bit about yourself, your journey, because you've had a really interesting career. So please, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing.
Thank you. Wow, the journey began um, many, many years ago, really. I've been visually impaired all of my life. Had a yearning to achieve a maximum that I possibly could to both impact society and our community. So consider myself very altruistic and community-driven. I'm also a big believer in technology and through innovation and the use of technology, the enabling factors of that, particularly to people with disabilities. When I left school, I went and worked at a software company and in London, was very promptly offered an opportunity to go and work in Finland at Nokia, which was just absolutely sensational, truly amazing opportunity. I progressed very well at Nokia, but when my sight began failing to such a point where I felt I couldn't be productive enough in that space, I left post and came back to the UK seeking something, something more manageable for me, but more importantly, to be closer to the people I knew and an environment that I recognized from a previous visual experience, as it were. I very quickly realized that opportunities in employment context were extremely hard to get, even though I thought I had a wealth of experience and my expectation was that it should be easy to get work. It wasn't, and that remains true to this day. Many disabled people struggle with that. So I began what many have quoted as being one of the most prolific entrepreneurial journeys going. To date, I've started, I've practically 19 businesses that I've successfully exited from. And they've all been involved in technology to varying degrees across every possible conceivable industry, from aviation through to telecommunications and even vending. So I've been there, I've seen it all. And I suppose I have a passion for sort of starting businesses, and the customer experience is really the thing that drives me. On a more sort of personal level, I'm a big political commentator. I like to believe that change comes from people getting involved and contributing. And indeed, I take that philosophy through to our community. So I put a lot of time and effort into helping both younger people with disabilities and indeed their families.
Excellent. I'm always interested in, so we've got a bit of a shared heritage, if you like, in terms of sort of working with the Scandinavians, and then also, I think, Antonio's and I both come from Siemens. Antonio's route was through Nokia Siemens. So, and likewise, I think we all have a real massive interest in that social good aspect of things. So you're now at another technology company. This time it's not one you've founded yourself, but it is super interesting, and it's one that I'm working with you and with my day job hat on, that we'll be implementing some stuff with you. But can you tell us a little bit about GoodMaps and what it is and the possibilities of the technology? Because I think it's fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, and it should be said that I joined the company very much on the back of the fact that it was the ability to combine my altruistic side with my commercial acumen. I really, really felt a strong desire to be involved in the organization. I reached out. I was very graciously received by the company, and so yeah, I'm heading up European efforts for GoodMaps. It's an indoor navigation solution providing point-to-point navigation and location information, predominantly focused on the built environment, although we do offer support for outdoor locations too. But in essence, the thrust of the work is the built environment. We offer a solution which allows people who are using either Android or iPhone smartphone technology to access spaces irrespective of whether or not there is any barriers produced or challenges produced perhaps via a disability. So it's an inclusion tool. It's not specifically aimed at our community, but it was designed, and this was the real thing that really inspired me to get in touch in the first place. You know, that I loved the initial starting point, which is, how do we get a blind person from the door of a building to the place they want to be? And that premise that sat nav gets you to the door of the building and then sort of euphemistically shouts out in an almost eureka way, you have arrived. And that's not true, because no one was seeking the door of the place. They were seeking what's within the space. And if we can help people explore those spaces, get to where they want to go, then we provide job opportunities. We provide opportunities for those people to spend money if they're customers. We provide opportunities for healthcare by getting people to appointments. And it can truly be anyone. You know, this is people pushing pushchairs, people in wheelchairs, people who are blind, people who struggle with anxiety. So it gives them the opportunity to explore the location ahead of their visit. Employers looking to diversify their workforces. It provides the opportunity not just to tick a box and say, hey, we welcome people, but truly to be able to say, here is a digital map of our location. Here is an ability to help employees move around in those spaces. So it's a truly amazing technology. There's a great bunch of people behind the scenes working to make it better. And it's such a wonderful company and wonderful place to be.
Neil, this is Deborah, and which you probably will figure out since I'm the only woman on the call. but we were told for years that we could not make something like this accessible. It just wasn't even possible, which I never thought that was true, but people have to have the will to do it. And before we got online, you were talking about just a few examples, and one of them was an example about the trains in the UK. And I was wondering if you could talk about the door lock and that on air, because making sure that things are mapped out, like you said, it can lead to employment, it can lead to true inclusion, but it's you were even talking once again offline about how, as a person that's blind, when you go into a new bathroom, every single one of them is designed differently, and it's so confusing. And I know I get confused. Sometimes you put your hands under the water, sometimes under the spigot and it goes, sometimes you don't. Yep. And every time I have to stop and try to figure out, what to do. Well, how in the world do you do it if you can't see it? But it's just so important. And one thing I want to continue to remind our audience is that as we make things more accessible to people that are blind and people that have mobility issues, everyone benefits from this design. So I was just wondering if you would tell the audience just a little bit about it, because I think sometimes people forget about little things like, do you care if the bathroom door is flung open when you're using the restroom?
Sure. So the story I was recounting to you is one of the UK operators over here. They released a fleet of new trains. Fantastic, really, really great. And once inside, the electric doors were very well marked, tactile markings, slide the thing open, slide it closed, and the lock button was marked. But the way you determined if it was locked for well over a year was a colored indicator, right? Okay, so here I am, needing to use this thing, and I'm not actually certain if the door is locked, and that's an appalling oversight. I often question how on earth these things get past, designers, and this is not novel, right? People have been blind for centuries, so how is it that someone doesn't sit there and say, and we talk about modern concepts of universal design and this sort of principle that designers and creators and innovators should be thinking about all demographics, which of course is nigh on impossible to think of everyone. But I don't think it's difficult to imagine, if I close my eyes, could I use this? And it took them such a long time to resolve that, even though every visually impaired person using that space would have commented and did comment. And it just seems preposterous to me that we have the Equality Act in this country, which is even though that it has its failings, I personally say that should have clearly resolve that issue well and truly, and it just doesn't make sense to me. And there are many other examples, particularly of services that roll out and people fail to make them accessible and usable by a wide range of people. Looking at the point I made again offline about how I often quote this, that when you have to be entrepreneurial about using the bathroom, you become naturally entrepreneurial about the way you look at life and the way you examine things. And I took part in an interview probably close to a decade ago now, which was really examining, why am I so entrepreneurial? What is that driving force? And I hadn't really realized up until that interview, when I examined it in my own mind, that actually it's my disability that's made me this entrepreneurial. It's that having this viewpoint of the world. Yes, a blind person just said that. Has made me consider things so differently, and it truly has made me realize that I see things differently. And as a benefit of that is I'm not distracted by a lot of visual, you go into so many meetings these days, PowerPoint and all of that sort of jazz. And I'm absolutely fixated on detail, and I'm in curiosity, of endless curiosity. Why are we doing it like this? How can we make it better? And I find that that's a unique thing, but it's not unique in the disability community. So many disabled people ask how and why, far more so than our able-bodied counterparts. So yeah, that's sort of the heritage there.
So you were telling us a series of stories that makes things very clear why they need to be accessible. So do you feel that when we talk about accessibility, disability, about good practices, best practices, sometimes we have a lot of guidelines, practices. Do you feel that we should focus more on the storytelling part that is able to highlight things that are more real than sometimes hiding everything behind, like you're saying, a PowerPoint with guidelines or something like that?
I truly think that that's absolutely true. That my position is very much that the day you put a 30-page guidebook in front of someone, a playbook or whatever you want to call the thing, the day you say, sit here, read this, the person's forgotten the final bit by the end of it, But if you bring in, and this comes back to employment opportunities, if you have people who, a much more diverse workforce, you can actually, even if it's incidental, by the way, even if it's just watching the way I function in a kitchen, maybe making my coffee, right? You're going to see things about how I interact with that space that you might make you think, if we did that differently, that would have been better for Neil. And you can learn things by just having a diverse workforce, by having people with disabilities in your space that get applied in the real world, far more so than making everyone every 6 months read the latest guidelines and the latest playbook and the latest PowerPoint presentation, which actually are dry, they're flavorless, they're lacking in context. And context comes from experience. And I really do believe that. And the other point that just to tag in there is that, to me, accessibility, usability, and inclusion, they're functions of both customer and employee experience. We have to have a situation where, people stop looking at accessibility, inclusion, and usability as requirements, as, oh, we must do this. And we need to be looking at it as, this is part of our customer or our employee experience.
Great. And we, at our own employer yesterday, we launched a new whole approach to employee experience. And our CEO was talking about how accessibility and the challenges of delivering that are key to creating better employee experiences. So I think that what's really encouraging for me is that there is real movement and momentum amongst senior leaders that have recognized that this is not a separate thing. This is something that's embedded in an overall good experience. Of course, like you, I'm working in the field for a long time, a pragmatist and a realist. We know that we're not going to change those things overnight. Now, as much as we would like to, have some privacy whilst we're on the loo in the train, retrofitting those trains takes months. They should have done it up front, but once it's out the gate, that process of going back and fixing it is really hard. So how do we put a positive spin on that? Well, actually what we do is we say, well, let's do it up front. Let's save you the cost of retrofitting. Let's do the inclusive design piece.
Yes, and I think that's really important to understand, that the cost of doing it up front is negligible, literally a pittance in relation to the cost, whereas the cost of doing it later is not only potentially the retrofit, but there can also be, at the further end of retrofit, and then across that spectrum at the other end, there's all the bad press that goes with it, there's the negativity, the bad customer experience, and frankly, litigation. People sue over these things, and quite rightly so. And what kind of organization are we? What kind of institute are we? What kind of organization? What kind of company? Are we the kind of people that want that negative experience, want that the stuff that happens at that end of the spectrum? Or are we the kind of company that want to be always seeming to be prioritizing the needs of everyone? And I don't find it complex to do it. I think it's really straightforward. It just has to come from the top. People saying from day one, right, at the leadership level, this matters.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we just absolutely need the stuff from the top. And I know Deborah wants to comment in a second. That leadership messaging to the people within their organization has a huge impact, because without that clear signal, people always have conflicting priorities, and there's always a reason to ignore doing the thing that includes. So absolutely we need that top-down messaging. Deborah, you wanted to comment?
Yes, and I agree with that. I agree with both of the Neils, because I know that I one time was training a very large ICT company in the United States, and we were training them, to make sure that all of their sites and their apps were fully accessible. And during the training classes, it was interesting. The students knew so much about accessibility; they already knew it. So I asked them, well, if you already know how to do this, why aren't you doing it? And they said, oh, no. They tell us what to do, what to prioritize. I'm not going to volunteer and say, hey, shouldn't this be accessible? So it must come from this top, and it's got to, be done very deliberately. But I don't understand why that anyone would design, a bathroom where we can't tell whether or not the door locks, because in the first place, it is going to impact people with visual impairments, but it impacts so many other people. There are 19 million American men that are colorblind. So maybe they can tell by, it's just so short-sighted. And, we can be, I don't understand why we would build anything that doesn't work for all human beings. And I think maybe we can look at society and say, wow, aren't we glad that we make Neil be so creative and innovative to even figure out how to go to the bathroom and lock the door? But it's just, I think it's ridiculous we're not designing for humans. I know that Christine Hemphill of Open Inclusion is working on some really cool design ideas to really encourage designers to think more about designing for all humans. But it is not just designing for people that are blind. It is designing so that it works for everybody. And I just am tired of the lack of leadership with this. And I'm glad in the United States that we're suing everybody. And it's unfortunate, but I wish that, because why do we have to sue you to make you comply? Why do we sue you to make you include us? But I guess that's what we have to do. But Antonio, I know you had a comment.
No, and to your point and to Neil's point about designing things accessible from the beginning, I can tell a story that happens in Ireland, especially affects housing, where people who are entitled to people with disabilities who are entitled to housing accommodations they have been trying to engage with government authorities to have a say at the beginning of the construction, not after. And they're almost screaming and crying, you can save so much, but just by listening to us before, then letting the builder to build the house and then retrofitting everything. So it's quite, and we're talking about a house. Neil was talking about the train. This is not just a small thing. Millions of euros or pounds are involved on these projects. This is a really big deal. So it's important that we all became more professional in the way how we address this topic.
I think the interesting thing is, if you think about it, from the employment perspective, if I can't get on a train and go to the bathroom, then how do I get to my job? Possibly, depends circling whether you need the train to get there or whatever. But and so if transport's not accessible and usable, how do we get there? If I can't live in a property near to the office or within commuting distance because the property is not suitable, I can't go to work. If I can't work, I can't be a productive member of society. I have self-esteem issues. I have low, so I need healthcare, which costs society money, and I'm not productive. I'm not paying taxes because I'm not in employment. So we need to start looking at that. There's a big cultural shift that needs to shift from whether it's the pity bucket of and whether it's the burden bucket of people who are on welfare and need state support and things like that, to this is a missed opportunity. Disabled people not having the appropriate accommodation, not having the correct access to transport, not having access to services that we can buy and products that we can buy is insane. So we need to do more as a global community of businesses, of organizations, and of companies.
I agree. But so when it comes to the maps, I know that I've seen some very interesting works coming from like IBM, trying to map out things, on stations and stuff. But I think of gigantic conference, and I don't know if we're going back to gigantic conferences, but probably, but just navigating that space, even as somebody that is sighted, is overwhelming. So I was just wondering, how did you figure out how to start mapping it? I was just curious about it.
So you mean the digital, how does it physically happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the process is really straightforward. We just literally have an individual walking around the space. They wear something that looks very much like a backpack that's out of the Ghostbuster movies. We go around, we do a LiDAR scan. Once the LiDAR scan's done, we convert it into a digital map, three-dimensional representation. And from that, there's some wizardry that happens behind the scenes. That's then accessible to anyone who has the app. The app is free of charge to the end user. The venues pay for the service. So that's whether that's a shopping mall, a transport provider, or indeed your employer in an office. It doesn't really matter. The idea is very much that the venues provide the service like they would Wi-Fi for guests and for employees, and the end user using the app has no increased cost. It's free to those individuals.
So on that, we know that some modern buildings are already built using 3D models. So a lot of data already exists. Are you taking advantage of that, or you just prefer to use the method that you just described?
Unfortunately, it has to be obtained at this point in time because of the unique nature of we combine two pieces of information, both the LiDAR and geo-referenced images. But there would be a hope in time, and we are actively investigating technologies constantly to provide alternative options. So today, no, this is the way it has to be done. But in time, the expectation would be that there will be a selection of technologies, and organizations will be able to choose, what fits best, within their space. What kind of users have we got? What is the expectation of how that space is going to be used? And my expectation certainly is that the technology will continue to improve and evolve. So this is just the beginning of this journey, really.
And so, yeah, I think that the journey is really exciting because there's an awful lot of inaccessible indoor spaces yet to map. And as someone with sight that can still get lost inside a building, I'm also thinking about how I might use it.
And Neil, what's fascinating, sorry to say, is that's been the real. If you look at segments that we are actively approaching, transport providers who are the obvious people. If you said, what segment's the most obvious place that would win out for this, transport ones are the most difficult to talk to about this and to have actually reach out. And yet the complete opposite is true in the corporate space, where corporate organizations have literally totally got it 100%. And it's people who've made comments just like what you have. It's not, the fact that it helps their disabled employees and visitors is seen as the icing on the cake. They recognize exactly what you've just said, that getting around spaces, even when your eyes function and all your limbs function and everything's rock and rolling in your accessibility space, is actually really difficult, subject to if you've been there a million times before, if it's your normal place of work, if it's a desk that you normally sit at. And we're getting into more and more, a culture where people, hot swap their desks, where they arrive at a building and they're not familiar with it, etc. And and it absolutely, people need guiding in the built environment. It's just, that's the way it is.
Yeah, I work with lots of clients, and I work with a large broadcaster that all of their buildings look the same internally. Yes. And they have this kind of alphanumerical system for where you are in the building, which doesn't really help you orientate at all, and it's very easy to get lost because all of the things look the same. So it removes some of that anxiety, because actually, being late for a meeting can make you really anxious. Yes, not knowing where you need to be, and that kind of thing is also like really challenging for the neurodivergent population. But you made a point earlier, which I kind of want to go back on, because it's something that's also one of my hobby horses, which was around, you were talking about the economics. Right, yes. And you were saying that there is this sort of imperative, at the moment we've been doing the pity bucket and the funding bucket, but actually I've been going on for a while now about how we ought to be treating exclusion like pollution, because essentially this is a problem. It's an externality. Inaccessibility is an externality. It's essentially a failure of the design and build process, and someone else is footing the bill. And so when we start applying these environmental sustainability frameworks to stuff, then you can actually see how it can work in organizations and how it can work at a macro level. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to solve all of the issues of each individual product design, but what you then have is this framework and approach that large organizations understand already, and is embedded in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Companies report on the sustainability, they report on ESG, and essentially accessibility is the S and the G, the social and the governance part. And there are also positive externalities, because when you do the inclusive design approach, you get the curb cut, right? And that positive upside is also an externality. So you can take well-established socioeconomic theories and start applying them to inclusion. And by doing this, we're then actually starting to measure the macro level impact of including people in society, getting better tax revenue, reducing the cost to the taxpayer of people not being able to meet their potential because we've designed them out. So I mean, I'm 100% with you. This is it's a rights issue, but it's also a social structure issue. And I think that every organization, whether they be government or large companies or small companies, can have a role to play in this.
I 100% agree. I mean, there isn't much to add to that comment. The reality is there is economic loss across the board, whether it's spend power, whether it's tax revenue, whether it's anything, if you curtail someone's ability to participate in anything, whether that's service products and employment and so forth in life, you curtail their ability to efficiently and effectively contribute. And at the end of the day, that's what society is all about, isn't it? We all contribute and we all gain. But the day you start curtailing someone's ability to contribute, then you also unfortunately enhance, and it's a yin and yang thing. If you curtail my ability to contribute, and to consume, then the upshot is magnified in my drawdown from society. But if you make it so that I can participate fully in your services, in your products, in the employment opportunities, in healthcare, etc., then you decrease the drain on the other side of that. And I use healthcare less, I use the welfare system less, I buy more of your services and your products, which is just a win-win across the board. I don't understand how people struggle with this.
Yeah, no, well, I think it's because they take a very siloed, compartmentalized view of things, and they're only looking at the cost of an individual thing. It's only when you can get to that holistic macro level view,
yes,
even within the sort of the benefit system itself, you have one lot of benefits where they're trying to reduce the cost, and others where they're trying to get people into employment, and they're not joined up. So they don't do a kind of total impact assessment across the piece. That you get these sort of systemic inequities built in that are not only bad for people with disabilities, but they're bad for society as a whole and for economies. So yeah, that 30,000 foot view is really important for people to have. We've reached the end of our half hour already. It seems rather to have gone too quickly. I need to thank the people that keep us going, the Microlink, the Barclays Access, the MyClearText for keeping us captioned. And I say thank you, Neil. It's been a real pleasure talking with you as always. We look forward to you joining us on Twitter on Tuesday night.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with anyone who wishes to interact on Tuesday.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.